Of this message is testimony, and I hope all of you have a testimony of the way God worked in your life. Today, I'm sure a lot of you want to know more about your pastor. So I'm going to share my testimony, which is much longer, a sharing time than you might have with somebody. You might want to just bring it down to about 5 minutes. But I was raised in a home that wasn't Christian. Although my family, my father would have claimed to be Lutheran because he was confirmed in the Lutheran church. He had left church early. But in order to make sure that his baby daughter didn't go to hell, I was baptized in the Lutheran church. Baptized out of hell into heaven, which, by the way, not even the Catholic Church believes that babies need to be baptized in order to go to heaven these days. But that's what he did. I was baptized. My godparents, one of them was a Christian and the other one wasn't, because you just have to have somebody to raise you if somebody dies, right? So I baptized, and then when we were growing up, we were sent to Sunday school. Probably, I thought, more like to just get us out of the house for the morning. And then I've got two brothers that we would go, and we went to Sunday school, and I wanted to go to church occasionally, but my brothers would get in a little trouble, and those ushers would come and kind of tap them on their hands. And so we kind of didn't keep going to church. And then when everybody was going through confirmation, I wasn't a part of the clique. So I didn't go to confirmation and did not continue on in that faith journey. My dad had decided early on that he didn't really like Christianity because of the way a pastor had treated his family when he was growing up. So he just didn't go, and then wanted all these world religions, and also dabbled a bit in the occult. So there was some stuff in my family that wasn't very healthy. And so I grew up in this particular family where I was looking in sometimes at the church and wondering and longing for what was offered there. I remember when my uncle married a woman who was Catholic, and we would go, and we'd come into the church, and I would just be amazed at what was going on in that church. I'd go and light a candle, or I'd wonder about the cross, and there was just something that was drawing me into the arms of Jesus. I was sent to Camp Wapsi-Y. I don't know if anybody knows Camp Wapsi-Y. With the YMCA, we went there, and I love this cross, this made out of 2 logs that was in the outdoor chapel, and the seats were all logs. And even in elementary school, I would do drawings of this, and I remember doing this etching of this cross. There was something about it that just drew me. This was, if you want to use Wesley terms, this was God's prevenient grace drawing me to himself. Now, my dad was a closet alcoholic, and his alcoholism grew full-blown later on when I was in college. And so there was some of that dynamic in my family, and I was the oldest. So if you understand alcoholic family terms, I was the fixer in the family, so the one that had to make sure everything went right. And I was the one that was also in charge of my 2 little brothers, but they weren't all that little because we're stair steps. So one was 1.5 years younger than me, and one was 2.5 years younger than me. So you can imagine how much they obeyed their older sister. And the one that just passed away this last year was over 6 foot tall, so he was taller than me, pretty quick. So if I was in charge, that didn't always work very well. But I was supposed to be the one in charge. So fast forward to college. I went to Mount Mercy for 1 year as I was going to become a nurse, and then decided that it was too much of a party floor. I couldn't get any work done, and I transferred to Northwestern College in Orange City, Iowa. So for those of you who are not familiar with Orange City is a Dutch Reformed community, and at that point in time, there really wasn't any chain restaurants in town except for Casey's, and everything was closed on Sundays except for Apostles. And the only reason Apostles was open was because you couldn't cook on Sunday, and so everybody would just have someone else cook on Sunday. And it was very, very confusing to me as I looked at this. It's supposed to be a Christian community, And it was a Christian community, but I saw this weird dichotomy of the way that the people lived or treated others versus what Jesus would have them do. For instance, they wouldn't work with the food pantry because it was run by the Catholic Church, and William of Orange had defeated the Catholics, and so it was just really weird. And I got turned off on Christianity, even though during that time there was somebody that came to chapel, because chapel was required 3 times a week, that talked about salvation in Jesus. And so I was like, I want this Jesus, but I'm not so sure about the church. The church that's going to raise all kinds of money for their monogram place settings, but not give to the food pantry because it's run by the Catholic Church. And the church that I've worked in their homes, and I see the alcohol in their cabinets when they're going and complaining about their neighbor going into the bar. That confused me. And so I really didn't know what to do with Christianity as a religion. But there was something about Jesus that kept drawing me. So during this time, I also had met my future husband, and he went to a church in which I went and I felt like people actually knew this God that they worshiped. They didn't get mad when the pastor went 1 minute over time. They actually sometimes went really, really long, and they were really, I felt, encountering this God that had put a longing within me for who he was. Back in Orange City, they would complain if it went 1 minute over. I hope you don't do that today, because that might happen. So then, but my future husband was not necessarily, he's a person that struggles with a lot of demons, and this was an abusive relationship that I didn't even think about at the time, even though I was eventually going into social work. So we got married right out of college, and then had our beautiful daughter, Camille, who you will, if you're here next week, you will meet Camille. And then during that time of being prepared for marriage, we went to his church because we were supposed to keep up appearances. So he wasn't a Christian, but that is where he was raised, and the pastor was doing the wedding, so we went to keep up appearances. And during that time, God was really drawing me in, but he had no intention of going to church. So after we were married, we didn't go to church. Now, fast forward a few more years, and Camille is getting close to 4, and she got sick. And there was a time in which I prayed, and I said, God, if you are real and you heal her, I will go to church. And I think I might have even included get me up for church on time in there. He healed her. And I went to church one Sunday. And then 3 months later, there's this incredible encounter I had with the Holy Spirit. I was not in church, but I had gone to Chicago, and there was a series of violent things that happened. And the headline on the Tribune on Christmas morning was that 60 children under the age of 16 have been murdered in Chicago this year. And right then and there, God spoke to me, and it wasn't an audible voice, but it was so clear. And he said, I need you to get past all your preconceived notions about church and hypocrisy in church, and get in church and do what I'm telling you to do. So the next Sunday, I went to church. And I told the pastor at that church that the pastor had married us, I said, I'm called to be a pastor. Well, he wasn't necessarily sure about that because Tom wasn't a Christian. And I think he thought I was a Christian because I went to that Christian college all that time. So he didn't really get it, and plus it was a denomination where women weren't necessarily called into ministry. So I just went and I served. I served as much as I could, and I just was there for church on Wednesday and Saturday night prayer and Sunday morning worship and Sunday night worship, and just took in everything God had for me. And because I had found a God that loved me. And I finally realized that what love was when God had come and entered into my life, this incredible, incredible gift of a God who loves us. And after we were there for a while, there was just things that were happening in my marriage, and I would not necessarily recognize it or not know what to do, because he could be pretty violent sometimes. And there were times in which I wanted to leave, but I knew that no one would believe me because of his position in the community. So I didn't. And then I wanted to be there and make sure that I showed him the love of Christ so that he could actually come to know Jesus. That was important to me. But there was a time in which something happened to my daughter, and I was so confused. I just left and drove and left her there. I didn't know what I was doing. And as I just drove, not knowing where to go, I stopped in a moment and said, God, if I can get to a payphone before midnight, which it was way before cell phones, where there were some people with bag phones. We didn't have those. I got to a payphone at 1:50. And the friend I called, I went there and she said, I wouldn't think any less of you if you left. So later on, that next morning, when he was at work, I packed up and we left. And we lived with different members of the church. There was probably, I could count on just my two hands, the people that were there were supporting me. But then what happened was the church became a very, very unsafe place for me. My one place of safety became a very unsafe, extremely unsafe place. As people were looking on, thinking they knew what was going on. My pastor told me not to tell anyone, so I was obedient to that and not telling. There was just a handful of people that knew, those that I was living with. And during that time, my daughter also divulged to me things that had happened with her dad. It was a very difficult time and not knowing what to do. I found myself in the dark and confused and wondering where God was, but at the same time, I just kept saying, God, what is it you're doing with this? What is it I'm supposed to learn during this time? And God would draw me close in worship and help and remind me that he loved me and adored me and that I was his child. As church became unsafe, I found another church to go to for a bit for healing. And I remember specifically this particular young man during this time that would make sure that I felt included in the family. He would come and, like one time, everyone was at a concert, and I sitting over on one side, his group was over there, and he'd come and sit with us. So there was this effort to make sure that I knew that I was loved and cared for. And I felt that love. And something I forgot from when I was being back in my childhood, I need to go back to that as I was thinking about feeling that love. We had a neighbor, Mrs. Evers, and she would give me little gifts, little bookmarks. I still have a few of the bookmarks about how God loved me. When I graduated, she gave me a Bible that just was there, shining the light of Christ in her quiet way all the time, just as some people in churches needed to do that, even as I was in the congregation, needing to feel that love from those around me. There were a few people that did that, like I said, in the church I was at, and then a few people that did that in the church that I went to. And all this time, I'm feeling this pull from God into church leadership, but at the same time, I'm like, I can't do that, God. I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy to step into a pastoral role as a woman who's separated and later divorced and couldn't love my husband to repentance or any number of things that made me feel as if I couldn't do what God had called me to do. But God kept calling me and kept calling me. Eventually, I knew I needed to go back to that first church because there was some unforgiveness in my heart, and I needed to go and forgive the leadership for the ways that they had jumped to conclusions and made decisions that were not necessarily ones that were of God, but were of the flesh. I needed to offer that forgiveness. And in that time of offering that forgiveness and meeting with the pastor, he said, why don't you just go to seminary? And I thought, why didn't you say that to me back how many years ago, right? But finally, you're saying to me what I needed to hear to be able to step into that place. But if I would have done it a long time ago, the work that God had done in my life during that time would not have happened in the way it did. Because that part of my life is a part that I'm going to use for the ministry that I am also starting as I'm working half-time here. I'm working half-time doing that to help churches understand how to be present with people in really, really hard situations, because we don't always do that very well as a people. So then I went to seminary, and in seminary I studied a lot about shame. I got my master's in divinity, and then I went back to school and got my doctorate in ministry, but you don't need to call me doctor. But so I am a doctor, and that doctorate in ministry is about shame, and the shame that sometimes we carry, and the fact that God came to face all of our shame as well. And I was a person that was walking in shame in so many ways, as I was in those times of not being able to be the perfect wife, or not being able to put my family together, or not being able to whatever. So I also have another daughter, as I think about things of shame, that I adopted after I was divorced, and she came with a whole pile of baggage. And Hannah can tell her own story. Hannah lived with me for 6 years. She moved in when she was 9, but she struggled with so many things. So eventually I ended up having to put her in a placement, because I knew that there was no way that we could continue to be. She didn't want a family, and then we couldn't function as a family because of just some of the dynamics in Hannah's life. I talked to her today, and she'll say, "Oh, those kids are doing a Hannah," and she'd be fine with me saying that, but she's got her own story. Now, fast forward to the year 2000, and not 2020, not 2000, 2020. My now ex-husband was arrested and for keeping a 10-year-old schoolgirl on a bus. And he is now serving in prison. At that point in time, I realized now I could share my story. Because before I was just the crazy ex-wife. I was lying, or I was telling stories, but actually there's irrefutable proof about this other crime that he committed. And because of that act, I'm able to share a little bit more about what happened in our lives. But that's not what this is about. This is about how God comes and gives us hope in the middle of great darkness. So this morning I wanted to tell you about this morning. So I got up, and I just decided to go out on the back of the parsonage. I got a couple chairs there to pray. And I wanted to watch the sunrise. And sometimes we're in darkness, aren't we? There's so much dark in our lives that we can't even see the Son of God. We can't even see how God is there present in the midst of it. And so I got a picture after the sun had started to rise a little bit. And see how dark some of those clouds are? They look pretty dark, don't they? If they were bigger, they'd look really foreboding, like they're going to come and take over. But how many of you, when you're in have you just noticed the glory of God right after a storm? When the light just breaks through? Or just the times at night when the stars shine so bright. It's so dark, but the clouds shine so bright. I think of my story, but my story is one story. All of you have stories, right? And there are times in which there's been great darkness, and you feel the darkness, and you wonder where God's at, or you wonder if there's going to be light at the other end, and you question. And I know I did that during times in my life, and I know some of you probably are doing that right now. But then it gets lighter, doesn't it? That's probably 7:30, 8 o'clock or something like that. You can see it, it's a little bit lighter out. That dark cloud doesn't look so dark anymore. And if there wasn't any clouds there, the sunset wouldn't look as beautiful, would it? Because the sun kind of reflects off the clouds. I think it looks so beautiful when we have those things that the dark that God can reflect off of. Now, you can jump to the next slide, Alex. There we go. See, those dark clouds are now white. They look so dark when we didn't see God there with them. See the sun rising. But then you go to the next slide. That's the sky. Now, I put that in there for a reason. Because sometimes when we get kind of comfortable in our good lives and in the good things going on around us, and it's blue skies, it's beautiful, but it just becomes, it's just what life is. It's just common, right? And we even forget to praise God in the middle of that because things aren't hard. So some of the biggest growing I've done are in hard times in my life. Some of the greatest times of drawing close to God are in those hard times. So please, 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 when someone's in a really difficult time, don't say things like, God, all things work together for the good of those who love God or are called according to his purpose, or some quoting back to them things like that, because that is just hard in times like that when you feel like God's not there. But to really, really think about the fact that that's a beautiful blue sky that God has given. And I am so thankful for what God is doing to stop and do that. But we just kind of get comfortable as Christians, and we forget those times, and then we forget to draw near. So don't forget to draw near during those times when the skies are blue and everything is good, and to remember to just sit with God and take time with him and bask in the fact that he has looked upon you as his beloved child, no matter how old you are. And I can tell you within my whole life, I have seen times when I just wondered where God was and if I was worthy of God's love. And then there are times that I'm like, thank you, Jesus. But still, there's times when you're like, well, it's good for everyone else, but I don't know about me. There are those moments that can happen. And they can happen for all of us. So as we think about this, I want to think back to when I was working on my just recovery, but also when I was in school and thinking about God's love, to really think what that means. I discovered it. I felt a calling when I was younger. And then later on, when I encountered Jesus, I knew it more. And then when I went through the struggles, I felt his love even greater. And as I looked back through his eyes to those struggles, I felt his love even greater. I lost sight of it as I lost sight in the midst of a church that many people looked at me with judgment or questioning, not knowing the story. But still, as I drew near to him, he reminded me of his love. But love is a word that we kind of toss around sometimes, isn't it? We don't even know the true meaning of it sometimes in the United States. There's 3 different words for love in the Bible. One is agape love, which is that sacrificial love that God came and gave us. And that's the kind of love that we need to remember. There's eros love, which is more lustful love, and there's Philadelphia love, which is a friendship love. But it's hard to walk in that agape, sacrificial love. But then, so we don't always necessarily remember and understand love in the United States. So if I was to ask all of you if Jesus loved you, what would you say? Yes. Now, you don't need to say this out loud, but if I asked you if Jesus likes you, if Jesus delights in you, each of those might get a little harder. The first time I was asked those questions, I was really having a hard time with that likes, and then really, really hard time with delights. But there's a scripture in Zephaniah that says he rejoices over you with gladness, and it's talking about the people of Israel, but we are grafted in, folks, so God delights in us. Now, one of those times in which I didn't really understand God's love, we read the Isaiah passage because I stood upon that passage for the longest time when I was in the middle of the separation from my husband. That says, "Fear not, I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." But there's a time in which I was really struggling, and that was when, in the middle of a separation before divorce, we were separated for about 2.5 years before we were divorced, and because I wasn't going to file for divorce, I just wanted my husband to get better. But there was a time in which a friend of mine said, go and write letters to people that have hurt you. And don't worry about using swear words or anything like that. Just get it out. Just write letters about what's going on to the people that have hurt you. And they were working at Teen Challenge in the Midlands. And I went out to Teen Challenge, and I just was visiting them, and I found a place to go sit over by a rock. And decided, okay, now's the time I can start writing. I don't have my daughter to worry about. I can just do this. And I started writing. I wrote, "Dear God, I love you so much, but..." And it took me forever to get the words out. I am so angry with you. And I tell you the reason I was angry is because I was trying so hard to be a good Christian. I was trying so hard to do everything right. And it felt like my world was crashing down around me. As soon as I got those words out on the paper, "I am so angry with you," God had me open my Bible, and I landed on Psalm 139. "O Lord, you have searched me and know me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up, and you discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways." Listen to this verse. "Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether." As a good Christian, I didn't think I could tell God I was angry with him, but guess what? He knew. He knew it already. "You hem me in behind and before you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Oh, where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the innermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me. Your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely darkness shall cover me, and the light about me will be as night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as day, for darkness is as light for you. For you formed my inward parts, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in the secret, intricately woven into the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there were none of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God, and how vast is the sum of them. If I would count them, they would be more than the sand. I awake, and I am still with you. At that moment of that letter, God reminded me of his presence. And he told me about how the darkness was not dark to him. And today, as I was praying, he reminded me of a song that was out during that time, so forgive my voice. When darkness fills my senses, when my blindness keeps me from your touch, Jesus, come. When my burden keeps me doubting, when my memories take the place of you, Jesus, come. And I'll follow you there to the place where we meet, and I'll lay down my pride as you search me again. Your unfailing love, your unfailing love, your unfailing love over me again. Now, I don't know your stories. I hope to hear them. I really want to sit down with you and hear your stories. But I'm confident that all of you have gone through times of darkness and times of light. And all of you have a testimony, even though you may have never given it to someone, of God's unfailing love. But I do pray for all of you. And somebody asked me when I was, at the preview meeting how I feel about altar calls. I said, I love them! But if any of you would like prayer for whatever you might be have going on today, I'm going to just ask Alex to pick a song and throw it on there, and I'll just have a time of just closing our eyes and being with God. But if you'd like prayer for either something that's going on or to be a better witness to those around you, because really it's not about you being better, it's about Jesus in your life and you being able to talk about it, or whatever might be happening, I invite you to come forward and I can pray with you as we listen to whatever Alex picks.